everyone, and thank you for joining us. Well, I say this afternoon, it's this afternoon here in London, but everyone's joining all around the world. So whatever time it is, thank you for joining us. And we're really excited to be sharing lots of knowledge and information around reporting. We are just going to share the slide deck now. I would say if there are any questions, please pop them in the chat. We'll do our best to answer, and perhaps if there are some other partners, developers, experts, super users around the community who can also perhaps help answer any questions. It's a really good opportunity for everyone around the community to share their knowledge and support each other. That would be really great. So I think we're just getting the slide deck up.
Yeah, I think Hamish has just crashed out. He's coming back in though. Yeah.
Excellent. And still people are coming in and joining us, so that's just fine. So we'll wait for Hamish to come back.
I'm back. Hello.
Here you are. Hello.
Apologies, my screen share needed me to restart Zoom. I think it's to do with a few recent updates.
Brilliant. Okay.
How's that work? Can everyone see a loading screen?
See a loading screen?
It should give us the slides in just a second. There we go.
Fantastic. Great. Okay. Well, we are ready to start, which is great. So we'll just start off. We'll do a little quick introduction. So hi, my name is Louise. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at CompuCo. I'm going to introduce Hamish.
Hi, I'm Hamish. I'm a functional consultant here at CompuCo. So I'm more of the sort of like Civi subject matter guy. And over to you, Alex.
Yeah, and I'm Alex. I'm Senior Marketing Manager. Some of you might have seen me on previous webinars, and I've also, doing all the communications. I'll be kind of like managing the webinar role today.
Great, thanks guys. So that's who we are. You've got a little overview of the agenda here. As I said, we've got a lot we want to share with you. There's a lot to go through. We'll start off by going over through an introduction to searches, queries, and groups. We'll then move on to CiviReport, and then we're going to talk through Search Kit and advanced queries as well. And we'll just do a little update on the Drupal 7 end of life, and then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. But as I said, please pop things in the chat, and then we'll hope for help from all the community today. So I'm going to hand over to Hamish without any further ado, and we'll get going.
Cool. Let's go on. So, yeah, the theme of today is definitely reporting, but the place that I want to start is actually searches, because I think that in so many cases, a search is the sort of simplest form of reporting. It's the way that we answer much more ad hoc questions. So I'm going to sort of build up today through I guess the simplest tools we have in Civi to answer questions about our data, and go all the way through to the kind of complex end with Search Kit and query building. But the example that I sort of give is that we have lots of ad hoc questions to ask Civi to get to where we want to see a particular number or a particular sort of slice of data. And I think that in lots of these cases, if we're asking the question sort of right now, how many members do I have? How many meetings happened this quarter? The simplest way is to do that with a search. And so we have a few tools that will let us do that. So starting with something like the simple quick search that I've shown on the right-hand side here. But there's also several other search tools that we can get into. So the standard search pages, things like the find contact search, the advanced search, all of which give us kind of nice overviews of the data and are good for finding different, specific slices of the data. And also, it's always worth remembering that Civi has these component searches. So for every type of data that we have, be it a contribution, a mailing, an activity, there's a search tool for that as well. And so if I go through and give my first sort of video example here, if my question is how many meetings happened this quarter, a really simple way to find that is to run this activity search, filter it for meetings, and put our date filter in as this quarter. And by running the search and letting that run, I get my answer now. There are 19 results, so 19 meetings this quarter. And that's just a really simple way of taking a specific question and using your search tools to kind of get that overview. As we come on, we'll look at reports, but there's basically the key is there's lots of questions that you don't necessarily need a report to, especially if the question is much more of like an ad hoc one. Moving through from a search, it's important to note as well that once you run your search, you can then pass that data on elsewhere. So there's lots of actions that you can do from getting a set of search results. So our 19 meetings this quarter there, if I wanted, I can export that data. And so it's always worth remembering that the bulk actions that you get after a search are a really, really useful way of taking that data and either acting on it, so doing things like updating those contacts, emailing them, or indeed exporting them. So if I wanted to pass that data into some other part of my reporting pipeline, I can do that from my search view. But moving on to the sort of next, I guess, layer of search, particularly in terms of complexity, I want to talk about advanced search, because this is where we start to get much more depth of functionality in terms of the things that we can search for, the criteria we can give, and therefore the kind of reporting type questions that we can answer. The way we always visualize the advanced search is much more like this sort of funnel where, starting with all the data in the system, we can add many more filters and sort of joins to start to really narrow down to a particular slice of data that I'm interested in. And the advanced search does a few extra things, the most important of which being that it can join different types of data together. So here we can see that when I'm searching in the advanced search, I can actually choose, first of all, the data type to start with. So it can return me contacts, it can return me participants, memberships, or any other sort of type of record. But importantly, once I've done that, I've then got access to a lot of different fields that I can use for my advanced search. So whereas before, if I wanted to search for activities, I'm just looking at the information about that activity, what type it is, what date it is. With an advanced search, I can combine these across a few areas. And so I can start to answer slightly more complex questions like, can I search for contacts with a specific custom field? Can I search for contacts who have several custom fields together or who have several records associated? And so here, if I show a sort of example video, I can run an advanced search where I'm really starting to reach into several data types at once. So I'll specify that it's going to be for individuals. It's going to be for individuals who have a UK address. So I'm adding that address data as part of the filter. But I also want to specify that they're going to be a current member. So I'll go to the membership section and I can either choose a membership type. There's not many set up on my test site, but I can also use that current member option to sort of find me current members. And I might also want to look into a different area and say that not only do they have to be a member, but they also have to have a membership renewal that's happened this quarter. And so now in terms of asking a question of my data in the database, I've been able to chain together a lot more specificity and look into a few different areas of the Civi database at once, as opposed to just the example I showed earlier, where I can get a list of activities, but only filter for the details of that activity. And so, again, this is still working on the concept that from a reporting point of view, advanced searches can be a great way to get a slice of your data, but one where the question you're asking has more complexity to it. While we're talking searches, it's always worth highlighting a few extra features that we always like to point out that can be really useful in specific scenarios. So one of them is Civi's Search Builder tool. And what this does on a slightly more technical level is let us use different search operators. And particularly things like is not and is empty are really useful when I want to look for, specify different kinds of filters for our data. So if I wanted to find contacts who don't have an address at all, or who whose contact type is not university but can be anything else. The search builder is one of the places we can look where we can start to specify that in a bit more detail. So it's a handy tool in terms of building these kind of reporting setups. Another one that we always like to point to is the include-exclude search. And again, this is useful in a few sort of more niche scenarios, but can be really valuable. And the key concept here is that it lets us overlap and compare different groups or different sets of contacts. So I can say include all my members, but exclude the ones who are in the UK, and see that makes, and let Civi do that comparison for me to like include and exclude different groups that I specify. Lastly, one other feature that's worth pulling in whenever you're working on searching is the idea that I can change the search profiles that I use. And so if I want to use something like an advanced search to get me an overview of an important set of contacts, I can also change the columns that Civi will display when I run that search. So rather than showing the default details of someone's sort of address and email, I can create a new profile, specify what fields I wanted to show, and have that appear as the columns in my search. And so I do that by creating a search profile to use. And so combining all these things together, I can start to use the search tools to get really customized filtering and customized sort of views of my data before I even sort of come to the reporting tools at all. And so again, yeah, while in lots of cases building reports that you want to use over and over is useful, for ad hoc questions, the search tools have a lot of power. And lastly, it's always worth, whenever you're talking about searching, mentioning the concept of smart groups, because what smart groups does do is essentially work as a saved search. Whenever we've run one of these contact searches and have put in a set of criteria, creating a smart group effectively gives us a group that will update itself going forward based on that search that I ran. So it can be a great way of saving those details, and then rather than having to input them in future, just coming back to my smart group and knowing that it will stay up to date with the criteria that I used. So if I had something like a smart group of contacts in the UK, I only have to run that search once, and then I can return to the group whenever I need going forwards. But let's move on and talk about reporting. And so Civi comes with a set of reporting tools. And in fact, what we'll talk about today encompasses not just this standard CiviReport tools, but also a few extensions that we always like to include at CompuCo and provide a few really useful extensions to the functionality. But the key concept to start with is, what is a report? So unlike a search where you're putting in the details the first time and running that search there, a report is a sort of pre-configured view of the data. So it's a live display. Every time you open that report, it's refreshing and showing you the latest version of the data. It's usually focused on one type of record, but we can incorporate more. And it's unlike, say, a search, which is just giving you a list of results. A report can start to transform that data. So it can aggregate, count the number of results. It can display it in charts and sort of and include sort of much more transformation. And because it now has its own sort of report identity, usually its own URL, it becomes something that you can link to, share, and sort of present to people, again, rather than the sort of more ad hoc setup of a search. So accessing sharing reports is really the first way that people start to see reports. And so I'm showing here the idea that once I created a report, it's got its own URL that I can then share with people. So in my little sort of example GIF here, I've been emailed a link to this report from another Civi user. And when I open it, I'm now into that report. The settings are already there, the data refreshes, and I can now see that information. Or the other really common use we see is saving reports into our navigation menu so that I can just essentially bookmark that URL, come back to it, and now see that overview of the data with those settings already set. So the key sort of point that the key sort of principle of a report is that it's a much more of an independent sort of a page or a display in Civi that I can now use I can come back to whenever I need, and I can share around within other Civi users, or indeed in a few sort of more like specific circumstances, I could start to surface or send that to people. And again, within the sort of way I set up the reports, I can control all of those things. So this is now talking about really how to go about making and understanding reports. So what's the process for me as a Civi user who wants to start creating reports and configuring them and having them sort of saved? And the first concept to understand is that of report templates. So every time I want to kind of create a new report, I always start with one of the templates that will be there already in the system. There'll be lots of templates in, as well as a few you can see here where we've got sort of standard templates and a few extended report templates that have additional details. But if I'm starting on my kind of new report in the reports area of the site, the first thing I'll always be asked to do is choose a template. One of the key things to understand is that there's the first choice you make is what template to use, and the templates will vary both in terms of what data they point out. So there'll be some contributions report templates that will look at contributions, and some that are pointing at, say, memberships, activities. And also each template will have within it different options for what it actually shows you. So the example here, I've got a contribution summary report and a contribution detail report. And in the detail one, there are more columns available to add because that template can sort of access more data. And so when you're starting to build a report, you might have to look at a few different templates and see what each of them can show you, and then choose the template that's right for you based on that, because each report will have a sort of different set of options available within it, or each template rather. They'll also have different options in terms of how they group the data, how they present it, and so on. And so the idea is that most of the time they're preset to help you kind of create a specific sort of view or look at a specific chunk of data, but you can configure your own kind of subset of options within that. So looking at it as a bit of a functionality landscape, taking an example here as the contact reports, if I open the reports area, I'll see a whole different set of templates. And coming back to what I said, different extensions will start to give us different starting templates. So there might be a standard set of reports that mostly displays things like the list of contacts for a contact report. I've pointed already to the extended report templates, which will have more fields and more options for transformation. And we'll see a little bit in a second of what the report plus reports do, which give us a few more options like graph options, pivots, matrix, and so on. So once I've chosen a template, we can get into the template and start to edit it. And there's a whole set of different areas that I can now configure. So the columns lets me show like what data I'm actually sort of surfacing and showing. Grouping lets me kind of collate that data if I want to sort of transform it a little bit. Sorting is a sort of visual display of how all of the results come in. And then there are the kind of the report sort of functionality areas where we can set things like how it will display, the title, the format, and also do things like configure this of the user access if I want to restrict or open up the access to this report. And those are done in these tabs across the top here in the report settings. So if I show the next page kind of an example of this, here, what I'll do is create a really simple report where I'm just looking at some activities in my site. So you can see I've opened up the reports area and there's lots of templates that I'm looking to choose between. And in fact, I'm just going to pick one of the really simple ones, an activity details report. And once I'm into it, I can refresh it, see the results. That should give me now a list of activities in my demo site. And then we go into the process of actually configuring the report. So the columns will let me decide what data to show. So I'm going to get rid of the column for priority, but I'm also going to add a few more for things like an email address and I think a birth date. So now I've chosen what columns will appear. I'm also going to adjust the sorting. So I'm going to say that this is actually going to sort and start, the results will be in descending order. And I'm going to add some filters to say these are going to be activities just from this quarter, and they're going to only be activities of a couple of specific types that I want to see. So hopefully this shows the sort of the steps that we go through in terms of doing the kind of the most standard configuration for a report. As we've started with a template that had a few preset things, and now I've changed some of the details within it to be to suit what I want to get out of this particular report. And then lastly, the most important thing you can do once you've sort of done that configuration is to save the report and particularly save a copy. So I mentioned at the start that we start with a template. We can then save this report that I've made, and it will now be added to the original list of templates as a sort of copy deriving from the original. And so what we end up with is, in that original list of reports I showed you, the ones that the copy I've just created will now be a template that someone else can use to create their own report going forward. So we can see in this sort of rough landscape here that from my base report, I can actually end up with several specific sort of copies, all of which are based on one original template. And so this is a really common structure we see in sort of client sites with CiviReports, which is that you end up building a sort of a whole library of customized templates, but all while making sure that you kind of keep those original core templates in place so that anyone who wants to create a new one can make use of that and create their own sort of offshoot of it. Lastly, when it comes to what we can do once we've sort of got a report set up and got it created, there's a really useful thing that we always like to point to, which is the fact that you can bring a report back to your dashboard. So when you first log into Civi, you get a set of these widgets that let you to show some basic details like Civi news and resources, but we can actually sort of customize this dashboard to show reports that we've set up. And so that means when you log in, you're seeing a much more useful, much more customized view of the most useful kind of overview data for you as a user. Each user can customize their own dashboard and can pull in different widgets and as they need. The way that we do that is in the report settings here. So I mentioned that one of the last tabs we have when configuring a report is this access one. And there's a really specific option that we can enable called add available for dashboard. And when you do that, suddenly the report becomes one of the widgets that you can pull into your sort of Civi home dashboard. And what you end up with is a much more useful view like this one, where I've pulled in my couple of activity reports here. And so when I log in, I can see a really useful overview. So that was, I guess, a slightly sort of whistle-stop tour of the reports tools. But now I want to go even further and talk about a slightly more complex, if more powerful tool in the form of SearchKit. With SearchKit, it's a slightly newer feature, whereas reports have been around for a long, long time. And SearchKit can be a little bit harder to master, but it is a much more sort of in-depth and powerful tool when it comes to being able to get at your data in Civi and being able to sort of surface it in the way that you choose. So as a sort of slight overview, almost glossary, there's a couple of tools that we'll be pointing to here, one of which is SearchKit, which is our query builder, and the other one is Form Builder, which is a great other tool we use for kind of making the displays, making the things that people can actually see in terms of of using these sort of search results. It's almost like a sort of back end and front end pairing when it comes to being able to choose what data you're getting out of Civi and then choose how you present it and format it. So as a quick sort of comparison in terms of why use each and what they do, CiviReport is really, really useful in a few ways, and it has a lot of work done for you in terms of the templates. And the options it gives you are sort of easy to find because you're adding a new column by checking a box, and a lot of the sort of data you want is put right in front of you. But the downside is that because the report templates are sort of built to help lead you towards a kind of certain templates, there can also be limitations. It's not fully customizable. You're sort of working within the template that you have. Whereas SearchKit is sort of the opposite in that it's completely configurable. We can have any number of like unlimited options, but at the same time, therefore, it is more complex because you have more things to choose from, and you have to know a lot more clearly what you're asking for and what you're trying to get out of the report. And often you sort of need to have a slightly better understanding of Civi's data structure and the way to build up a query in order to get SearchKit to really give you something that's really, really useful. So the process that I'm going to sort of walk through today is from the start, from me as a user. What would I be doing to actually go from absolutely scratch to a really useful dashboard that I can show people? And the steps are, as I said, creating our search and then creating either a display or a form to then show that to people. And so the key things are the search is the details of our query. So what are we showing? What are we filtering? How am I kind of joining data? A display is kind of a sort of flat but non-interactive way of showing that data to someone. So it could be a list of contacts, or it could be a kind of set of search results almost. And then a form is a much more interactive version of a display where it's showing everything that's coming out of that search that we configured, but it can have things like interactive drop downs, a few more options for people to actually work on the data. And so we're starting to create something that is a bit more of a sort of useful user configurable dashboard. So when we talk about what is a search, just to show the sort of simplest example, I can go into SearchKit here on my site. I can create a new search in the top right here. And the absolute basics that I'll do to create a search are, first of all, name it. So this is just naming the query, giving it some sort of overview. I can choose what type of record I'm looking for, and I can save the details. And you can see here that because this is a contact search, it's already given me a set of basic columns showing the contact ID, name, and the type of contact. But I can also add some additional columns. So here I'm showing the person's email and also their age. And I can sort of rearrange and reorder these columns as needed. So I haven't added any filters, I haven't added any details, but I've created the most sort of basic search possible here, where I'm now just sort of telling SearchKit to give me that list of contacts. And that's my starting point for going forward. A display is then what we would make next, and I'll sort of come back to the nuts and bolts of it. But here's an example. This same sort of contact list is something that I've linked to. So this is a lot more like a report now, where we've saved the URL for it. It's it's accessible to other users, but there's no optionality here. So this person can see the display, but they can't choose what's happening in the query behind it. It's just it's just the results of that query that I set up earlier. And then lastly, if I take the process through to the end and end up creating a sort of similar form, in this case, I've got a slightly different example where I've created a form for donations. Here, you can see it looks a lot like a display, only now we've been able to add things like filters that the user can adjust. So here I've got a list of all my contributions in the site. And so someone accessing this can not only see the results of the sort of search that I've set up, but can also adjust the drop downs and actually filter that data to suit them. And so everything there in terms of what data I'm showing and also what options are available in these drop downs has all been configured in the background by me creating this form. And I can then hand that to my users so that they have a dashboard that they can plug their own sort of their own settings into. So what I wanted to show there was kind of the output. So once you've worked on a search and made a display and made a form, what can it sort of look like as an end product? But I want to take a bit of a step back now and start to go through the process of what we can actually do configuring this and what the options are, because this is where we'll start to see the real depth and power in SearchKit because of the sheer number of options and things you can configure. So we saw at the start there that we have that my first search was a contact search, but actually I can adjust this straight away and I can say that this is going to return things like activities, cases, any kind of core record in Civi can be the sort of base record for my search. The next thing I can start to do, which is really, really powerful, is to add more data types. So in the example here, I've started with searching for contacts, but now I've actually added an activity as the sort of linked record. So we're saying showing not only individual contacts, but any activities that are joined to them. And I can specify how that works, whether it has to, whether it's contacts without any activities, or whether it's only contacts with activities, or contacts regardless of whether they have an activity or not. And so when I add that linked record, I can now add the columns associated with it. So whereas before it was just things like the name of my contact or the email address, I can now add columns that refer to the data on those activity records, like the activity date, activity type. And so I'm sort of pulling data from more than one place now to start to build up this slightly more detailed response that Civi gives me when I run the query. So you can see here in the example that we've got one person, Deanne Abry, who's got several activities and it's returning all of them against this person. So this process can kind of go on in quite an in-depth way. We can join records and then join onto them and really kind of build a chain of linked records in Civi. So as an example here, I could have my base contact and the activities for that contact, but I could also add on a related contact to the person and then add on details of that related contact, like what kind of member they are. And so by adding these kind of with joins each time and specifying the settings for them, I can actually build lots and lots of detail in terms of the way that I connect to several different records at once. So when I run these, when I add these sort of joins, or this is like the way the SearchKit describes them is the with option, I can bring in a whole number of different things. And this is what I sort of showed just now in the demo. I can set how I want that to act as a filter or not, and therefore kind of narrow down my data as I start to join it together. And you can see that in the example here, even as we add our like contacts activities, there are extra filters that come in. So not only is it saying I can add the activities that are related to those contacts, but specify whether you have to be the sort of the person who created the activity or the person it's for or the assignee, and again configure that as I go. So what this means in terms of Civi's data is it does mean that you've got to understand a little bit of the context in terms of how Civi connects data types. For example, email addresses are a different table to contacts, so are things like tags. And so you can imagine that if I was trying to get detail from several areas, you have to know that you're joining those areas into your search each time. So in the couple of kind of example snapshots there, I might be looking for cases, but also want to pull in the case tags and do that with one of these with joins, or contacts, but also the various email addresses for each contact, like their home, work, and billing. Similarly, the related contact has detail that I can add in the same way. So if I'm joining in the top right here, contacts, and then the related contacts, I can specify what kind of relationship. So I can say that I only want to see a person and their employer. And then I can also add details about that employer in the same way that I was able to add details about my activity earlier. And this is, again, just showing how we can start to sort of chain together details from each of our linked records each time. Next up to sort of build my search start to finish, I want to add some filters, because at the moment I'm getting every contact with every activity. So first of all, in the filter conditions tab on the left here, I'll add a filter that says the contact type is always going to be individual. And then I'll also add a filter for the activity type, because in this case, I only want to see a couple of specific types of activity, not everything. And again, I've got options here in the way that I can configure that. So I can say, in this case, the activity must not be email, or I could say the activity type is one of, and then give several different types that I'm looking at. Or in fact, I can I'll add an extra filter here as well for the activity date. And when I do that, I get different options in terms of those sort of filters. So I can add a between filter option, which lets me pick two dates and say, I only want to see activities between those dates in the sort of date picker. So the key concept here is that for every kind of detail on a record, like in this case, an activity, we can add filters, and we can add a bit of nuance in terms of the way we use those. So different types, different ranges, different sort of ways to like really interrogate that data. So, and that's what the kind of the where is in our query terms. So here, there's there's a whole set of different operators we can use, a few of which are shown. So record, we can say it's got to be a particular ID or a particular name, or it's got to be the opposite, so cannot be closed in this case. We can use sort of a number has to be above or below certain values. So we can look for, say, all donations above a certain amount or below a certain amount. We can use the contains to find things like a partial word match. I've mentioned it is not one of, so we can sort of search filter negatively to say exclude the following types or exclude the following options. And then there's even more sort of details that we can use, like is liked, lets you sort of do partial matching, is empty. So I could say, find me contacts who've got no activities or who've got their middle name is empty, that kind of thing. And basically, I can get into real detail in terms of the filters that I apply to start to give sort of to really sort of trim that data down in terms of those results. The next step I'll do, again, in terms of this sort of query I'm building up, is grouping. And grouping, to me, is really the moment where a search result can start to turn into a bit more of a proper report. So everything we've done so far is just showing a sort of list of things. We've got contacts and the activities that are on those contact records. When I start to group my results, I'm now actually transforming that data a little bit. And so in my example here, I'm going to group by the activity type. And what that means is that we're going to say in our results here, we'll have each activity type and then how many things are associated. So we can see immediately in our results that there are 111 meetings, and then we've got a list of all the people that are associated with them. So at this point, I can start to sort of rearrange these columns to make it a bit easier to read. But effectively, this has now become a bit more of a pivot table where I've got a list of types of activity and how many of each is in the system. So if I wanted to see how many meetings have happened this year, I could add that filter and then group by the activity type, and now see that I've had 111 meetings this year, and these are the people that are associated with them. So when we switch on that grouping, so here I've just rearranged the columns to make that a bit easier to read. When we switch on the grouping, we can basically say, tell Civi how to display each field. So for contact IDs, it's counting them up, whereas for names and all the other fields, it's listing the results. And so we have a sort of our pivot count of the number of phone calls and so on, as well as a list of all the associated contacts. So again, with these, we have a lot of different options and a lot of ways we can tell Civi to sort of present this data for us. But the key thing is once you understand what your kind of categories are, what you can group by them, and that lets you present the sort of a sort of summation of all the results that are linked. So in another example here, I've got a list of contacts who all have a region, and I then group by that region, and now I've got sort of for each region how many people are in it, and we're starting to kind of collate and present our data. And so here, just to show the sort of the options that you have when you're doing that grouping, you can add in sort of more transformations at this point, where you could say, I want to see things like the average, I want to see the maximum. And so I can really start to add a bit of sort of like numerical analysis to my data, where reports of things like my highest donations or the average donation, or the total amount of donations divided by every month. All of these sort of can be configured by using a combination of the way we sort of group and also then present the data in these group by settings. Lastly, going back to sort of where I started, we've done all these, we've put in all these settings to our search kit search. We've started to not just return a bunch of activities and a bunch of contacts, but also transform that data a bit. I now want to make something that I can pass on to other users, to other staff members. So what I'll do here is make a display. And so in my search, what I'm doing is trimming out a few columns, because here where I've decided I really want is this sort of summary of my activities that are happening. So what meetings and what phone calls have gone in. And on the left-hand side here, I have this option to add, and then one of the display options. So I'm adding a table here, and that's going to create that display page that I showed earlier. The key thing that this lets us do is start to really adjust the options. So I'm going to rename some of the headers. So these are not just like the kind of the system titles. So contact activities, activity type. I can title those however I want and start to present this and make it a bit more readable to my users. And I can also do things like change the formatting. So you can see here, I've got these options around the alignment, a link through if I want to sort of rewrite text or let people edit the results. So I'm really choosing how this is going to be presented when someone views that display page. So here, rather than count of contact ID, we're going to say that it's number of attendees, because that's what we're kind of counting in that grouping in that column. And for name, I'm just going to put list of attendees. So that makes it really nice and readable. And at the bottom, I hit preview, and now we can see essentially what people would see opening that display page. So the key to sort of think about it is that the display is the part where you do that kind of labeling, formatting, and generally sort of presentation element. So the two really most commonly used display options are table and list, but there's also things like grid, which again is another sort of way of formatting the data. But again, this is running. This is the sort of like the full detail of what those options you have. So reordering, relabeling, and kind of dictating what you want people to be able to do once they're on that page. So you can really you can really go into detail in terms of how people will interact with the display page once it's set up. And then once it's saved, there's that view display option on the right-hand side there, which lets us kind of open the page, and that gives us the URL that we're going to use. And so that's the thing we can then share, bookmark, add to the navigation bar. Now we've got our kind of flat display that we can use to view the data. But let's go one step further and say that we want to make this more of a dashboard. So what I'll do here is, in the top right-hand corner, there's this forms option, because we have the form builder installed as well. Ooh. In fact, this is the video that was broken from earlier. I do actually have another form showing this, which I'll come to show that instead. So bear with me, and I'll show you the form process in just a second. One other detail to show when it comes to forms is the idea that we can make them contextual. So we can do a kind of contextual reporting. So the idea here is that if I've made on the left a display showing a sort of breakdown of all of the activities that I have in my Civi database, I've got 300 meetings of 300 phone calls, some emails, some contributions. What I can do is make a contextual version that I've added to the sort of standard view of my contact record. So when I open Deanne Avery's contact as a sort of fictional person, I can also see that this person has 2 emails, 3 contributions, and 2 payments. So I've got a sort of contextual filtered version of the same report. And the way we do that is in this settings area in the form page. So we can add to contact summary and add to summary block. The other really useful feature that I want to cover that is sort of newly, that's come a bit more recently into SearchKit, and we're starting to get sort of to see real use for, is this idea of segments. And what segments do is let us kind of create an extra artificial field that we can use to bucket the results of an existing one. So we can sort of define some rules and some boundaries for what we want our segment to look like, and start to bracket and to bucket data. So if I show a bit more what that looks like here, the example I'll use here is I want to break my donations into categories where I'm going to have a sort of like a small, medium, and large buckets for each donation that I get. And so I've started in the SearchKit page, but gone to this data segmentation tab and created a new segment. And then what I'll do is start to define my options. So I'll label this one a small donation. I'll set what I'm kind of examining. So this case is the total amount for my contribution. And I'll say that it's got to be less than, in this case, I think it's less than 35. And then I can add another bracket. So for a medium donation, and again, give that an amount. I'm going to say it's less than 75. And then add a final bracket, which basically covers everything else for a large donation. And we can flip the sort of filter criteria to here to say it's going to be anything that's bigger than 75. So I've now got sort of 3 categories to catch all of my donations in the site. And we've created a segment. What this then looks like here is, hopefully this will start to show the whole process being pulled together, is if I have a list of all my contributions here in a search, whereas before I would be adding columns to show details of either a person or a contribution, that segment that I created is now available as a column to add, and it's also available as a filter. So it's become a sort of an extra field that I've created that's based on the details of another field. So I can now not only display that, but I can filter by it and sort of use those segments. And you can see that when I refresh the search, each donation there shows as being sort of large, medium, or small. It's now sort of become one of the options there. But let's go a step further and actually pull this into a form. So now's a chance that I can sort of show you creating a form off the back of this search and surfacing that dashboard. So here I'll give my form a URL. I can adjust the permissions if I want on the side here. And the key thing that I'm doing is in this tab here, I'm adding a filter, which I do by just dragging and dropping it in here. So on the left-hand side is my list of fields, and I can drag any of them on to make them filter options in that form. So once I've given it a title here, I'm sort of doing the simplest possible configuration. I save it, and once it refreshes, I've now created this form page. So going back to the start, we saw an example of a form page where we've got the same sort of thing in a display. We've added our data segment to it as an option. And we've also added the same data segment to it as a filter. So now this person can go to this page, toggle the filters as they need, and sort of use those as a sort of live way of adjusting what they see on the page. And so kind of connecting back to the part that I couldn't show you earlier, the key part is starting from my search kit view, I can create this form in the top right here under that forms section where I've saved the details of my search, and I'm now going to create a form from it. Which basically lets me connect the query underneath to the form that I want to display. So hopefully that sort of concludes, and admittedly there's been a lot of detail here and a lot of I guess a lot of quite in-depth technical steps, but hopefully that gives you the sort of logical chain of how we can turn what is a sort of powerful underneath the hood query builder into an actually sort of useful dashboard that we can save and share and let people put their own sort of filter options in and use as sort of reporting tools within our site. So there's lots of steps to go through, but the end result can be really, really powerful in terms of having these pre-saved reports and being able to sort of share them within your organization, share them within other users in Civi, and have sort of full control on how you surface that data. The last detail I'll give in our last few minutes is a kind of coming soon for the future, which is this, which is a tool that I know is being worked on, which is CiviCHART Kit. So we've seen a few bits of detail about it, but the work is kind of ongoing. So we'll know more when we know more in the future. But it's a really exciting prospect that hopefully the last stage of this process would be doing this work on a search kit report and creating a sort of really lovely visual chart dashboard that I can have all the same functionality with. But sadly, that's one to point to for the future. So watch this space and hopefully an exciting development for the future. So with that and the last couple of minutes, I'll hand back to Alex. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for your time. I hope this made sense.
Actually, I'm going to jump in here. Thank you so much, Hamish. I mean, that was a lot of information. I hope everyone got inspired to look at different ways of doing their reporting. We'll be more than happy to answer any questions or if there are any specifics that we don't get to today. Obviously, we could please do reach out and we'll be happy to discuss more. Just wanted to end with just sort of mentioning Drupal 7 end of life for those who it may be relevant for. There is on the next slide, please, Hamish. Just to let people know, we actually did a community briefing a couple of weeks ago to go through all the different options for people who are on Drupal 7 CiviCRM. So please head over to our YouTube channel, CompuCo, if you'd like to see that briefing. But just to let you know that we are working in partnership with CiviCRM core team and Hero Dev to be able to provide never-ending support for people who do want to stay on Drupal 7 or who are not ready to make their decision yet and need a little bit more time to figure out what they want to do. Maybe they need more time to decide what the best path is or to think about the investment they might need to make the move. So if anyone would like to speak about continuing the never-ending support for Drupal 7 and CiviCRM Drupal 7, please do be in touch as well. So I think that's everything. How long will never be? Never is forever. But we'll be happy to talk about that in more detail. So please do let us know if you'd like to discuss it more. So I'll say thank you very much to everyone for joining. It's been great having you all here. It's been a flurry of questions. And really thank you, Hamish and Alex, for putting this all together, and Hamish for a wonderful presentation. And we just hope everyone has a great end of the day or rest of the day, and then we will finish here just on time, I think. So let's pause, let's stop here, and I guess if anyone does want to ask a question